Welcome back. I hope you did a good job on the native versus noxious quiz. I hope that you can tell at this point that you can't just tell by looking at something, a plant and a flower, necessarily to tell that it's a native plant or a noxious weed. Because sometimes noxious weeds are beautiful, most of the time actually. So we need to learn to be able to identify the difference between the two. That said, we're going to move on and start to talk about the impacts noxious weeds have on various things. So let's get to the next slide. So in this picture that you're seeing on your screen, you notice there's an abundance of a yellow flower. What this yellow flower is indeed a noxious weed. And what I want you to really take note of is that there seems to be really only that one plant growing here. And this is typical to noxious weeds and their invasiveness. As noxious weeds spread out of control, they tend to take over areas. And when they take over an area enough that not much more is growing there but that noxious weed, they have done what is really hard to recover from, and that's created a monoculture, meaning only one type of plant growing in an area. And you're witnessing that happening in this picture. Another thing I'd like you to notice is that this is growing along a river, so a wetland or a riparian area. So these monocultures can develop on any of those habitats that we spoke about, whether it be a forest or a prairie or this river riparian area. So now I want to have you think about what are some of those impacts that a noxious weed could have on things that we maybe talked a little bit about. And I've listed them here on the screen, and those are wildlife habitat, our recreation, our agriculture, and our water quality. So let's learn a little bit more about that. So our wildlife habitat, definitely a plant that is invasive is going to impact our wildlife habitat, because let's remember, a habitat provides their shelter and their food. And a lot of times those are plants. So if those important plants that help them survive are swapped out or taken over by noxious weeds, these animals that you see on this picture are going to be impacted. I know living in Montana, we really love to either hunt or just see our giant herds of elk. Well, that would be impacted if we let weeds take over. I like to tell the story of the Mount Jumbo herd of elk that winter there each winter. They go there because they have ample food. If we let that open space, that habitat, become taken over by, say, spotted knapweed, do you think it would impact that elk's life or that herd of elk's life? It certainly would. It might not just happen in 1 year, but over time, when they have less food, less shelter, they tend to become weak, just like us. When we eat poorly and we don't get enough sleep, we tend to be more vulnerable to be getting sick and maybe injured. So it's the same with animals. If their food and shelter are impacted by noxious weeds, over time, this is going to impact them. The middle picture of the baby deer is very nicely hidden in its habitat on the prairie at the bison range, actually. If that didn't have the biodiversity of all those different plants and grasses, and it was just a solid field of, say, leafy spurge, that little animal would be less hidden to its predators. So that's how that would impact that little guy. Plus, its mom needs to be able to eat nutritious grasses to be able to feed it. And the last picture on the right there shows a ground nesting bird nest. So our native bunch grasses are very important for cover and protection for those little guys. So all this can be impacted if noxious weeds move in. Now let's talk about recreation. At the start of this program, I told you that the native flowers, they're there to make me happy. Well, I certainly love to recreate when we have native flowers all around. So let's talk about how noxious weeds can impact our recreation and the time we spend out on our open spaces. How many of you have gone out hiking or messing around and you come back looking like this dog with seeds stuck all over you, or your pets come back looking like this? I'm sure a lot of you can raise your hand and say yes. How about this? Send me an email to that email address on the first slide about what you think the name of that particular plant that leaves those seeds is. We'll see how many of you get it right. It's very frustrating when we get seeds stuck to us. I really find it frustrating when I go hiking and my shoes and socks also look like that. So, noxious weeds that take over an area that we like to recreate can cause us to become frustrated with our time spent outdoors, and that's not very fun. But let's talk about the ethical thing we should do when we do indeed get these seeds stuck on us. So when I get a seed on me, like this dog has on them, and it's constantly rubbing on maybe my arm or my foot, the grass seeds are rubbing on my foot. Instinctively, what I want to do is I want to pick it off and I want to flick it off of me. Okay. But what are we really doing if we do that? If we pick a seed off and we throw it down on the ground and it's a noxious weed, well, we are going to end up spreading the problem. We'll spread it to a new area. Say we've hiked a mile and then finally found that seed and we threw it down. Well, we are spreading that new plant to a new area. So the right thing to do would be either just try to leave them be until you can be done hiking and we can pick them off and throw them in a garbage can, or you can pick them off, throw them in your pocket, and then haul them out. But the right thing to do is to not throw them on the ground. I know it's tough because it can be very frustrating when they're rubbing on you. But the best thing to do is to take care of it the right way so we aren't being part of the problem. That middle picture is of a boat motor, and there are aquatic or water weeds stuck all over it. And that's becoming a bigger issue here in Montana, as we're trying to protect our wonderful waters from the impacts of invasive aquatic plants. And I think you probably all have started to hear about the aquatic mussels that become a problem and ruin our lakes. So that's just another way invasive plants, and for that matter, species, can cause havoc with our recreation. It tends to make it a little more frustrating. So prevent the problem from spreading where you like to be. Now let's talk about how noxious weeds impact agriculture. And agriculture is how the word noxious weed actually came to be. These invasive plants were impacting the ability to effectively grow crops and cattle, etc., in agriculture, and they needed to be addressed. And that's when the Department of Agriculture started to list plants on noxious weed lists. So, looking at these two pictures, we see a herd of cattle in the background on the picture on the left, and in front of it is a yellow flower. Do you think that that's a good plant or perhaps a noxious weed? Here's a clue. If you can look closely, do you notice that below the yellow flower there are long spikes? Does that seem like a plant that a cow would like to eat? If I were a cow, I'm going to tell you I don't want to eat it. It's going to poke me in the mouth. So it is indeed a noxious weed. It's called yellow star thistle. So let's say I own this ranch and I have yellow star thistle. My cattle are not going to be happy. They are not going to be healthy, and I'm not going to make any money producing these cattle. So it's definitely going to impact my ability to be effective at producing cattle to sell for beef. Another thing to think about is this next picture. Say this was a ranch that you owned. And I'm going to tell you that that purple flower pictured there is called spotted knapweed, a noxious weed. Say you don't really care about spotted knapweed, you're fine with it growing there. You maybe like the bees that fly around on it. But you live beside other people, you have neighbors, and they are growing wheat. And the other neighbor is growing hay to feed his cattle. Well, they are not going to be pleased with the amount of spotted knapweed you have on your property because weeds don't know that they're not supposed to cross a fence line. So your spotted knapweed is going to end up spreading to your neighbor's fields. And when that happens, people tend to get a little crazy. So that's when this noxious weed law comes into play. There is a law that says you may not have spotted knapweed or any of the other 36 listed noxious weeds growing and flowering on your property. It's against the law. That said, I don't go door to door saying, I'm sorry, Joe, you are growing spotted knapweed, it's flowering, I'm going to have to ticket you. The law is in a place for people that are typically really having a problem with their property. For instance, this picture that you're looking at. What the weed district would do is contact this property owner and say, hey, we've heard from a lot of your neighbors that they're disappointed that you have spotted knapweed growing out of control on your property and it's spreading onto theirs. So what we would do is offer some helpful suggestions and try to come up with a management plan for this property or Joe to deal with the problem. And if Joe can't agree on any type of management to control this problem, what we have the right to do is to go in and treat those weeds for Joe and then bill him in the form of taxes. So that's how the noxious weed law works. We try to do it a little bit more delicately here in Missoula because we really want everyone to succeed at what they're trying to do. Now let's talk about how noxious weeds impact our water quality. And this is just an illustration of what a riparian area and the surrounding area from the water might look like. If you notice on the left-hand side, we have a ton of trees and bushes, and they have substantial root systems. And what that might do is help protect our waters from becoming contaminated with heavy metals that might be running to our water. Those roots are important filters to keep our water clean. It keeps our water clean and it keeps it cool. On the other side, we also have a bit of a buffer from an agricultural type of a land. All those native plants and different types of vegetation, again, have the various root systems that are needed near water to help filter out those pollutants. All these roots, prevent erosion, and they provide important habitat for all those living things that like to be near the river or water. Do you think our native fish would like sunny water that does not have native vegetation along the rivers? What do you guys think? I mean, I like to swim in kind of warm water, but what are we known for here with our rivers in Montana? Cool. They're cool and they're clear, right? That's what our native fish want. They want cool, clear water to be able to thrive in. So if noxious weeds come into these riparian areas and they slowly, but ever so often can do, overtake and take away that biodiversity, do you think that's going to be impacting our native trout, our fish? It certainly is. So noxious weeds definitely can impact our water quality for us and for our native fish. So in our next section, we're going to talk about why these noxious weeds can compete so well with our native plants and actually do a better job at competing with our native plants. So this is just a little preview of what's coming next. Send me those questions and we will talk.